The screen flickered once before the stream began. I was already half asleep, laptop resting on my chest, but something about the silence in my apartment that night made the static feel louder than it should have been. It wasn't the usual noise of a dead link. It was intentional, like the stream had waited for me. 30 seconds and a figure appeared on screen, a man bound to a chair in what looked like a warehouse. The lights above him buzzed and pulsed faintly, and behind him a mirror caught just enough to show the shape of a room. My room. Down to the lamp, the desk, even the dent in the closet door. Let me know where you're listening from tonight and if you've ever come across something online you wish you hadn't. And if these stories help pass the quiet hours, feel free to follow along so you don't miss the next one. My name's Dana Ellis. I was 37 when this happened early 2022 and living in a one-bedroom apartment outside Tacoma. I'd just come off a rough stretch. Breakup, job loss. A sleep schedule that barely qualified as human. I'd started drifting into strange corners of the internet late at night, mostly for distraction. Not anything illegal, just old forums, abandoned message boards, threads that hadn't been touched in years. There was a kind of comfort in it, like walking through an empty library after hours. That night it was a little after 2:30 a.m. The wind outside had been kicking up for hours, rattling the frame of my bedroom window. I had the lights off, just the pale blue wash of the laptop screen lighting up the room. I'd clicked into a thread titled, "Things You're Not Supposed to See." Most of it was nonsense, broken links, hoaxes, low-res videos that felt like student films trying too hard. But one comment caught my eye. It didn't say anything, not really. Just a countdown in a black box. White numbers ticking down. No title, no description. Just one reply underneath. Watch it to the end if you're brave. I don't know what made me stay. Probably the same thing that makes you keep reading a story you already know won't end well. I let the countdown run. When it hit 0, the screen stuttered with static. Then it opened into what looked like a live video, not a recording. The chat feed was moving in real time with hundreds of users typing short, excited messages. At first, I assumed it was some creepy online game or ARG, but the setting didn't feel fake. The camera was angled toward a man sitting in a metal chair, hands tied behind his back, duct tape over his mouth. He looked limp but breathing. Overhead, a flickering light swung faintly. The place looked like a garage or warehouse. Concrete floor, exposed pipes, a stack of tools on a metal shelf off to the side. Then a message appeared across the top of the stream. Place your bet, how long will they last? The chat exploded, people typing in numbers, jokes, some throwing emojis. It was surreal, like watching a crowd place bets at a dogfight they were pretending was fiction. And just when I was about to shut the whole thing down, the camera moved, not on its own. Someone adjusted it slightly, shifting the view toward that metal shelf. There was a mirror mounted beside it, cracked at the corner, dusty. For only a second, maybe less, the mirror showed the reflection of a bedroom. My bedroom. I know how that sounds. But I recognized the exact placement of the desk lamp, the navy throw on the end of the bed, the cracked vertical line in the drywall behind the headboard. It wasn't like my room. It was my room. I sat up fast, nearly dropping the laptop. The video had already shifted back, the mirror no longer in frame. I paused, rewound, but the moment had passed. The stream was still playing. The man in the chair had started to stir. His eyes blinked open, slow and unfocused. He looked barely out of his 20s. His shoulders twitched like he was trying to stay still. I scanned my own room, checking every corner, every vent. Nothing looked out of place. But my hands were shaking. I pulled the blinds closed all the way, turned the laptop toward the wall. Then I typed into the chat, asking if anyone else had seen what I did. My comment was buried in seconds, hundreds more flying by. Nobody seemed to care. Or maybe they were just used to it. I shut the browser, closed everything, unplugged the router. For good measure, I turned off the power strip under my desk. The quiet that followed was the kind that vibrates in your ears, thick, hollow alert. I stayed up until daylight, pacing around the apartment. At one point, I grabbed the steak knife from the kitchen drawer and kept it on the nightstand, just in case. The next day, I told my friend Eli about it. He's a programmer, rational to a fault, doesn't believe anything unless he can reproduce it on a machine. I expected him to roll his eyes, but instead he just went quiet, asked for the link. I sent him a screenshot I'd taken of the countdown page. That was the only thing I had. He texted me back an hour later. That site doesn't exist anymore. Domain's dead. No record, no cache, no DNS. He said it looked like a burner, a domain built to vanish. Then a minute later, another message. Dude, look at the window in your screenshot. I opened it again, zoomed in. In the far right corner of my bedroom window, just behind the partially closed blinds, there was a shape. Not clear, not a full face, just the faint outline of features, eyes, nose, mouth. Like someone had been standing out there watching me from the alley. The thing is, I live on the 3rd floor. No fire escape, no balcony, no ledge. There's no way anyone could have stood there. But the shape was there. I didn't sleep that night either. I turned on every light in the apartment, kept the TV running just for noise. I even started checking my email drafts compulsively like I was waiting for something. And then it came. A few days later, buried in my drafts folder, was a message I never wrote. No subject line, no recipient, just a single sentence: I saw you watching. You made your choice. Don't pretend you didn't. I deleted it immediately, but I still check my drafts now and then, just to be sure. Nothing else shows up. I moved a few months later, bought a new laptop, changed my ISP, even switched phone numbers, and as far as I know, nothing else ever happened. No more countdowns, no more faces. But I haven't opened a live stream since. Not once, not even harmless ones. And I don't think I ever will, because I know what I saw in that mirror. I know it was my room, and whatever that stream was, it saw me too. I don't usually talk about this. There's nothing dramatic about the way it started, no flash, no warning, but I still remember the exact moment it went from just another freelance job to something I've never quite been able to scrub from my conscience. I was living in Tucson at the time, just barely keeping myself afloat, doing small video gigs, branding work, indie film trailers, and the occasional low-budget YouTube project. Nothing glamorous, just enough to get by. I was 29, living alone in a cramped second-floor studio, the kind of place that always smelled faintly like dust, where the walls let in just enough light to remind you it was morning, but never enough to feel fully awake. My only real company was Felix, a fat old tabby, who perched beside my monitor and occasionally knocked things over to remind me he was still alive. Work had slowed to a crawl that fall. Clients ghosted. Projects got delayed indefinitely. Savings I thought would last through winter had dried up by the end of September. So I started digging deeper than I normally would beyond the usual freelance platforms. I landed on a board called Iron Packet. I'd only browsed it once or twice before, back when someone I knew told me that's where people went when they didn't want a paper trail. There was a post near the top. Short, no real details, just minor anonymization of footage. 5 files, $700, fast turnaround. The username was Midnight Sync. They didn't say what the footage was or where it came from, but they responded quickly when I reached out. Within minutes, they'd sent me a Dropbox link along with a specific list of instructions. Blur all visible faces, leave timestamps untouched, keep it in black and white, and export using a particular codec. It wasn't the strangest request I'd ever gotten. Sometimes private investigators or true crime YouTubers hired me to clean up surveillance footage or obscure license plates. This felt similar, cold and impersonal but doable. I didn't ask questions. The files took a while to download. When they opened, I saw what looked like security cam footage. Grainy, low angle, no audio. 5 camera angles showing the same run-down motel parking lot. Nighttime, sparse lighting. The kind of place you might pass on a long drive and forget the moment it's behind you. 3 people were involved. 2 men dragging something heavy, a rug maybe with obvious weight to it. One end sagged limp. The third person stood near a parked Dodge Charger, constantly looking around. All 3 wore hoodies. The footage had that sickly look old black and white security video has when there's too much movement, jagged, uneven. I hesitated. I didn't like what it looked like. Still, I told myself it could be staged. I'd seen elaborate prank videos online or weird ARGs made by college students. Maybe this was the same. I did what I was paid to do, blurred the faces, rendered the files, zipped them, and sent the link. The payment hit my wallet within the hour. Then another message popped up. Thanks. Your hands just cleaned up a murder. I stared at that message for a long time. Not because I believed it right away, but because of how quiet it made the room feel afterward. Felix wasn't pacing. My laptop fan had gone completely still. Even the old fridge, which usually buzzed like a dying wasp, was silent. I typed a single question mark. The account was deleted before I could hit send. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of that rug sagging in the middle kept playing on loop behind my eyes. At one point, I got out of bed, turned on the footage again, and started scrubbing frame by frame, looking for anything I missed. There was a moment, maybe 5 seconds near the end of one of the clips, where the rug shifted just enough to reveal something near the edge. A bracelet, small, plastic-looking beads and a silver heart charm. It caught the light just enough to be noticeable, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't just weight being dragged. It was someone. The next morning, I turned on the TV. I wasn't even really watching, just needed background noise while I stared at my coffee. But then a name I didn't recognize pulled my attention. Sycamore Pines Motor Lodge. It was the motel in the video. I recognized the layout, the cracked parking lot, the row of flickering lights near the back fence. The news was covering it as a developing story. Homicide suspected. No confirmed identity. Police were asking for public tips. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know if what I had was useful. But when I went back to check the files to see if I could offer a copy or a version before, the blurring the folder was gone. Not just deleted, gone. No trace in the recycle bin, nothing in the file path. Even the Dropbox logs were clean, like I'd never opened anything at all. I ran a full system check, virus scan, log history. My antivirus didn't flag anything, but I knew that didn't mean much. If someone had the skill to clean out my files without tripping alerts, they knew what they were doing. Later that day, I drove out to a coffee shop I used to work at just to get out of the apartment. I sat in a corner booth with my laptop and tried finding the job post again. Iron Packet had no record of it. The thread was gone. Archived pages showed nothing. The username didn't pull any hits. When I came home that night, everything felt off. The windows were closed, but the air inside had that wrong kind of stillness. Felix paced near the door like he smelled something I couldn't. Around 10, I stepped into the shower. I left the laptop on the kitchen counter. When I got out, there was an envelope on the floor. No knock, no sound. Just there. Unmarked pale yellow like something you'd find at a DMV. Inside was a single USB drive and a folded note. This is what happens to people who ask questions. I didn't plug it in. I never even considered it. I took it 3 blocks down to an alley behind a tire shop, smashed it with a brick, then dropped the remains into a dumpster. That same afternoon, I walked into a big box electronics store, bought a burner phone and a new external drive, then wiped my entire system. New OS, fresh install, deleted every tool I'd used for the job. After that, I stopped freelancing. Took an in-house job editing corporate safety training videos. Mundane, overlit, and completely safe. No late-night threads, no nameless clients, just a cubicle, a Keurig, and people who called you by name when they needed something. But I still think about that footage sometimes, about the charm bracelet and the way the rug dragged across the asphalt. About the other version I saw on the news, the one edited by someone else. I wonder if what I submitted was used to mislead the investigation. If I erased something vital. If maybe that version they aired wasn't mine at all, but someone cleaning up after me. I'll never really know. That's what eats at me. Because someone out there used my hands to cover their tracks, and they made sure I knew it. I don't usually talk about this. It's one of those stories where the more you explain it, the less people believe it. But I remember every detail, and I know what I saw. It was spring break 2022. I'd gone upstate to visit my aunt and uncle for a week just to get away from the city and maybe catch up on reading for one of my psych classes. They lived in an old farmhouse about 20 minutes outside Shroon Lake. Nothing fancy, just quiet and far from anything. The kind of house that creaked at random times and smelled faintly of cedar and attic dust. They had slow internet, spotty cell reception, and heat that made loud banging noises every time it kicked on. It wasn't a place built for productivity, but I didn't mind. I needed a reset. My cousin Ethan was 17, a quiet kid who mostly kept to himself in his room, playing games or editing video clips on his hand-me-down desktop. I hadn't brought my own laptop, so he let me borrow his old one, a chunky Dell that had definitely seen better days. The keyboard was missing the N key, and the screen had a burn-in line through the lower third, but it booted up. I sat up at the dining room table late that first night with a mug of tea and an article I needed to highlight. Something about human behavior in high-stress scenarios. The irony doesn't escape me now. I made it maybe 20 minutes before boredom kicked in. I minimized the PDF and started poking around the desktop mostly out of habit. Ethan's screen was cluttered with half-open folders and random file names. Things like LOL, vid3, and meme-latch-dump, all the usual teenage digital chaos. One folder caught my eye. It was called Archive Streams. The icon wasn't anything unusual, just a standard folder, but when I opened it, there was only one file inside. A single .html file, named with that day's date. That was what made me click it. The date matched the one on my phone. Not yesterday's, not a week ago. Today. When I opened the file, it launched in a browser tab. The screen went black for a moment, then loaded what looked like low-res surveillance footage. The kind you might see from a cheap home security camera, jittery, pixelated, and cast in a faint red light that seemed to pulse off-screen. The room on screen was small and windowless, with concrete walls and a drain in the center of the floor. A man was sitting in a metal chair with his head slumped forward. His arms were pulled behind him, bound with zip ties. He looked maybe mid-30s, pale, unshaven, still. I assumed it was something fake, maybe a horror project Ethan was editing for a class. The footage wasn't exactly Hollywood quality, and the lighting looked theatrical. But then I noticed two details that made my stomach tighten. First, the timestamp in the corner of the screen showed today's date the same as the file and the exact time. I double-checked my phone. The match was perfect, down to the minute. This wasn't a recording. It was live. The second thing I saw was what was written on the wall behind the man, a whiteboard with a red marker scrawl. At first, I thought it was gibberish, but after a second I realized what I was looking at. It was an IP address, my IP address. I'd looked it up earlier that morning while trying to help my aunt reset the router. There was no mistaking it. The numbers matched exactly. I froze. My hands hovered over the keyboard, suddenly aware of how quiet the house was. I told myself it had to be a coincidence, a prank, maybe. Something Ethan had set up ahead of time. Except there was no way he could have known I'd opened that folder. He hadn't even mentioned it. I tried closing the tab, but it didn't shut. It just minimized, then reopened in a new window. I pressed Control plus Alt plus Delete. Nothing happened. Then the speakers let out a sharp burst of static, and buried beneath it I thought I could hear whispering. Not words, just this layered murmur like several people talking in a language I didn't recognize. It didn't sound like audio from the video. It felt like it was coming through the speakers. I slammed the laptop shut. My heart was pounding in my chest, fast and shallow. I sat there in the dark kitchen trying to process what I'd seen. Then I got up and walked down the hall to Ethan's room. The door was cracked open, and I could hear metal music playing softly from his speakers. He was at his desk, headset on, completely absorbed in whatever game he was playing. I knocked lightly. He looked up, pulled off one ear of the headset, and gave me a confused look. I asked him, "Are you messing with me?" He blinked at me, genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? That folder on your old laptop, Archive Streams. Did you put something in there?" He shook his head. "I don't even remember making that folder. Maybe one of my friends did." He sounded completely genuine. I didn't push it, just mumbled something about a weird file, and went back downstairs. When I reopened the laptop, the stream was still running. But something had changed. The camera angle had shifted. It was lower now, closer to the ground, tilted slightly upward. The man in the chair was looking straight into the lens. His mouth was moving like he was trying to say something, but no sound came through. His eyes were wide and locked onto the camera like he knew someone was watching. And somehow it felt like he was looking at me. I leaned closer. There was this pleading expression on his face, this kind of quiet desperation that made my stomach turn. It didn't feel theatrical. It didn't feel fake. It felt like I had interrupted something real. Then a new line of red text appeared below the video, blinking slowly. Viewer 12 connected. There was no chat box, no buttons to pause or exit. Just that phrase sitting beneath the timestamp and the IP address, which was still clearly visible on the whiteboard. I reached for my phone to call someone. No signal. I walked to the living room to try the landline. Dead. That didn't make sense. The router was lit up and working fine. I could still hear Ethan yelling upstairs, gaming online like nothing was wrong. For him, everything was normal. Back at the laptop, I tried typing in a new address, anything to escape the page, but every time it redirected me back to the stream. Then the video glitched, paused for half a second, and resumed. But now the man was gone. The chair was still there. The restraints dangled loosely. A dark trail, blood or water I couldn't tell, led off frame. The camera didn't follow. It just sat there, fixed on the empty room. The whiteboard had changed too. The numbers were gone. In their place was a new message written in large, thick letters, "Do not look away." I remember whispering those words to myself, like repeating them would make them less real. The stillness in that basement felt heavy, like the stream had turned into a mirror, and I was the one being watched. Then, from the far edge of the screen, a figure moved. Just a silhouette, no features, no face. It drifted slowly behind the chair, too smooth to be natural, like it wasn't walking, but gliding. I closed the laptop again, hard, left it on the dining table, and walked straight out the front door. I didn't tell Ethan or my aunt and uncle. I walked 4 blocks to the gas station just to be near other people, to feel something normal again. When I finally got signal, I looked up the IP address just to be sure I hadn't imagined it. It traced back to the neighborhood, my aunt's network. When I returned to the house an hour later, everything looked the same. Ethan was still gaming. The laptop was shut and idle, like it had never been touched. I asked him again about the folder, and again he looked genuinely confused, offered to wipe the drive completely. If it made me feel better, I let him. But even after it was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had made contact. I didn't sleep that night. Every screen felt like a trap. I taped over the webcam, unplugged the smart speaker in the corner, even turned my phone face down. And still, every time I blinked, I saw that whiteboard. Not the words, not the man, just the message. Do not look away. Back in 2021, I made a mistake. I still think about every time I sit at a keyboard. Not because it cost me a lot of money, though it did, but because of what came after. I thought I understood the risks. I thought I was smarter than most, but what happened proved I didn't understand the rules at all. At the time, I was living alone in St. Paul, working from home as a cybersecurity contractor. Nothing glamorous, mostly consulting for small companies on firewall setups and threat simulations. I was decent at what I did, and I liked the work. It gave me structure, and I didn't mind being alone. I was also making decent side money, flipping crypto mostly, altcoin swings, and arbitrage across platforms. It was fast, sometimes stressful, but it kept things interesting. Around early April, I was working on a client project that needed a specific network exploit, the kind of tool that used to be passed around in back channels or IRC groups before everything went corporate. I knew where to look. I'd been on the dark web long enough to understand how to vet vendors, check logs, filter scams. I was cautious, or so I thought. The vendor I found went by the handle Null Forge. His profile was clean, hundreds of reviews, all glowing, stretching back almost a year. His listings were detailed, professionally worded. There was even an auto-response bot to answer basic questions. It looked as legit as anything could in that space. I paid about $1,300 in Bitcoin and expected the tool to be delivered within 3 days. But nothing came. I waited 5, then 8, sent a few messages, polite at first, then direct. No response, no delivery. The account stayed active but never acknowledged me again. Eventually, I accepted I'd been scammed. It happens even to people who know better. But I didn't take it well. Out of frustration, I posted a detailed write-up on a forum I sometimes used not for revenge, but to warn others. I broke down the transaction, posted screenshots of the listing and wallet address, and flagged the behavior pattern. A few others replied saying they'd been hit too. One person claimed to have lost nearly $5,000. I figured that was the end of it. A week later, on a Friday night, I left work around 9 and walked the usual path back to my apartment. It was a quiet area near West 7th, mostly residential, with little corner stores and narrow sidewalks. I stopped to grab a drink from a 24-hour place I liked, then texted my buddy Drew that I'd be online soon for a gaming session. That's the last thing I remember clearly. I woke up on a cold concrete floor under buzzing fluorescent lights. My mouth was taped. My hands were bound behind my back with zip ties. My legs were tied together at the ankles, and I was lying in a pool of something sticky. It took me a few seconds to understand what it was. Blood. I tried to sit up, but my left hand felt like it had been plunged into boiling oil. When I looked, I saw why. My ring and pinky fingers were gone, cleanly severed. It didn't even register at first, just this numb, disbelieving static that filled my chest and made my ears ring. The space I was in felt like a basement or storage room. No windows, low ceiling. The kind of place built for utility, not people. The air smelled like bleach and rust. I remember hearing faint movement above me, footsteps, deliberate and slow, like someone was pacing. Once I heard whistling. Not a melody exactly, more like someone mimicking a song they only half remembered. I never saw a face, not once. At some point, maybe 2 days later, maybe 3, I was dumped outside a loading dock on the industrial edge of town. I was barely conscious, wrapped in a blue, moving blanket like discarded equipment. A trucker found me, called 911, and stayed with me until paramedics arrived. I don't remember much of the ambulance ride except someone saying I was in shock and had clean severance. In the hospital, they asked me all the expected questions. Did I owe money? Was I involved in anything illegal? Had I received threats? I told them the truth. I explained about Null Forge, about the post I made. The cops took notes, nodded a lot, and said they'd look into it, but I could tell they didn't really understand what I was talking about. One of them asked, "So, like hackers," I didn't even answer. The recovery was long. Physical therapy for my hand, psych evaluations. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. Not because of the pain, but because of the silence. That low hum from the fluorescent lights still echoed in my head. That whistling. The cold, matter-of-fact way someone had removed part of me not out of rage, but as if crossing off a to-do list. About 5 months later, something arrived in the mail. Not to my old address I'd moved, but to a P.O. box I'd started using for everything. It was a padded envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a USB thumb drive. The note was typed, not printed, just a single line. "We protect our own. Consider the balance settled." The drive held a cold wallet. Inside it, the exact amount of Bitcoin I'd lost, plus a little extra. A tip, maybe. Or interest. I never touched it. Still haven't, but I check it every so often. The balance never changes. I showed everything to the police. They found no fingerprints, no trace of where it had come from, no explanation for how someone had tracked me down after I'd disappeared offline. One officer read the note and muttered, "Well, that's not something you see every day." That was the last time I tried to explain it. The scariest part wasn't what they did to me. It was realizing how long they might have been watching. A week before it happened, my buzzer rang twice in the middle of the night. No one was there either time. I thought it was kids messing around. Once I came home and found my cat locked in the bathroom, a door I never close. Little things, just enough to make you start doubting your memory. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. I haven't used the dark web since. I barely even check crypto anymore. I keep my laptop in a locked drawer. I haven't replaced my missing fingers, and I don't plan to. They remind me that in some corners of the internet, people still play by rules you don't know exist until you break one. And if you ever do, they make sure you remember. Back in 2019, I was living in an off-campus apartment just outside Flagstaff. It wasn't much, a small one-bedroom with sun-bleached blinds and a carpet that never quite looked clean, no matter how often I vacuumed. I was 21 then, in that in-between place where school didn't feel like progress and life hadn't started yet. Most of my nights were the same cheap beer, late-night YouTube spirals, scrolling through forums I had no business being on. That particular night, I had dropped a tab of LSD around 8. It was something I'd only started experimenting with recently, more out of boredom than curiosity. By 10, I was flat on my back, watching the ceiling ripple like water. At some point, probably near the 3-hour mark, I landed on a forum post that looked like a joke. The title was something like, "You won't believe what's real down here." The link took me to a site that looked like a parody, pixelated cats with rifles, drop-down menus, labeled with cartoonish options like piano wire or banana peel. The layout was absurd, like someone had built it as a meme or some kind of ARG. My brain was buzzing and scattered, and I thought it was hilarious. So I filled out the form. Name, mine. Address, also mine. Target, myself. Reason. Because I'm a dumbass, I remember laughing to myself when I hit submit. I thought I was being clever. Funny. That kind of laugh where your body is numb and everything feels like a simulation. I fell asleep on the couch not long after, still giggling. The next morning I woke up groggy, the apartment reeking of leftover ramen and burnt incense. My laptop was still open, but the screen was black. I plugged it in, thinking nothing of it. The form was already gone from my memory. Just one more weird moment from a weird night. 3 days later, a box arrived. Plain brown cardboard, no return address. My name scrawled in thick black marker across the top. I figured it was something I'd ordered and forgotten about. Wouldn't have been the first time. I opened it casually, one hand holding a half-eaten Pop-Tart, expecting maybe a book or some cables. Inside was a burner phone. That was it. No packaging material, no note. The phone was already powered on. A message blinked at the top, new image received. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or get worried. Then I tapped the message. The photo was of me, sitting on my bed, head tilted slightly, eyes unfocused. It was the same night I'd filled out the form, same shirt, same lighting. The angle was just off enough to tell it wasn't a screen capture. It had depth, grain, shadow. It looked like someone had taken the picture from inside the room. For a moment, I genuinely couldn't move. Just stared at the screen, heart climbing up into my throat. I looked over at the laptop still sitting on the desk. The webcam light hadn't been on that night, or if it had, I hadn't noticed. I peeled a piece of tape from an old takeout container and stuck it over the lens, trying not to shake. Then the phone blinked again. Never joke with contracts. That was it. No threats, no demands, just that sentence. I didn't call the cops. I should have. I know that. But try explaining to an officer that you filled out a fake hitman form while tripping, and now someone has a photo of you sleeping. They'd laugh, or worse, they'd start asking questions about what else was on my browser history. I didn't want that. I powered everything off, every device, stuck the burner phone in a shoebox, and shoved it under my bed. Then I grabbed a bag, tossed in some clothes, and drove an hour and a half to my cousin Blake's place in Prescott. I told him I just needed to get away for the weekend. He didn't ask too many questions. I didn't give him many answers. The first night I barely slept. Every sound felt loaded. Every passing car outside pulled my attention. I kept thinking about that photo, about how easily someone had taken it, sent it, and let me know they'd been watching. Blake kept asking if something was wrong. I told him no, but I don't think he believed me. I couldn't even look him in the eye. The second night, I sat on his porch around midnight, chain smoking, and staring out across the tree line. There wasn't much moonlight, just a gray smear behind cloud cover. Still, I had the overwhelming feeling that someone was just beyond the trees watching. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't fear, not yet, but something deeper, like shame mixed with anticipation. The next morning, I drove back to Flagstaff. Not because I felt better, but because I didn't want to drag Blake into it. The apartment looked exactly the same. Lights off, blinds closed, silence pressing in. I didn't touch the laptop, didn't go near the shoebox. I just paced, unable to sit still. Then, just after 2 a.m., the doorbell rang. One single chime. No knock, no footsteps, no voice. I stood in the hallway, staring at the door like it might breathe. After what felt like hours, I crept to the peephole. No one was there. The hallway was empty. But taped to the center of the door was a single yellow sticky note. "Contract voided. Stay clever." That's all it said. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I packed a bag before sunrise, drove until I saw signs for Tempe, and stayed with a friend I hadn't talked to in months. Told him it was a mental health thing. He didn't question it. I didn't volunteer more. I never opened that burner phone again. I never tried to find the site. I started using a VPN, got a new laptop, physically removed the webcam. I don't know if it helped or if I was just performing a ritual to feel safer. Nothing else ever happened. But every now and then I'll wake up in the middle of the night and check the door, or walk past a mirror and feel like something's just stepped out of frame. That sticky note is still in my wallet, folded, faded, but there. And the worst part, I still don't know if it was a warning or a receipt. The last time I ordered anything off the dark web, it wasn't for thrills or money. It was just for sleep. And maybe that's what makes it worse, how ordinary it felt when it started. In 2019, I was 32, newly laid off and fresh out of a breakup that gutted me more than I let on. I was staying in a low-rent apartment complex on the south end of Akron, the kind of place with popcorn ceilings and cheap hallway carpet that always smelled faintly of mildew. I had no health insurance, and the panic attacks were getting worse, full-body lockups that left me on the floor, gasping like my brain had hit a dead end and couldn't find its way back out. Someone on a forum I followed, one of those threads about managing anxiety without insurance, mentioned a vendor named Red Nerve Rex. They said he was discreet fast and sold meds that were cleaner than what you'd get in Mexico. I hesitated for days. Then I ran out of the last bottle I'd been stretching since the breakup and found myself hovering over the order form, heart pounding. I bought a small pack. Generic anti-anxiety meds I'd been prescribed before, back when I had coverage. The listing looked professional. Ratings, encrypted messaging, tracked shipping. It felt more like ordering from an underground pharmacy than anything else. A week later, the envelope showed up, plain, padded, no return address. Inside were 20 pale blue pills, neatly packaged with no extras, no weird residue, no signs of tampering. I took half of one that night, and for the first time in weeks, my chest unclenched. I breathed through the night, slept 6 hours without bolting awake. I told myself I'd just do it until I could find a new job, until I could get insurance again. But the weeks blurred together, and I placed 2 more orders. Both arrived without issue. Each time the envelope was a little tighter, sealed, the pills a little more carefully labeled. Rex even started messaging me short, polite check-ins, asking if I'd received everything on time, or whether I wanted the VIP option. I ignored the messages at first, but eventually curiosity won. I asked what VIP meant. He replied within minutes, said it was priority shipping, discreet handling, guaranteed zero interference. I didn't think much of it and replied, sure. 2 days later, I got the next envelope, same outer packaging, same return address. I brought it inside, locked the door, sat on the couch, and opened it. There were no pills inside, just a single sheet of paper perfectly sorted. It said, "Now we know where you live. You owe us for trust." I didn't move for almost 10 minutes, just stared at the paper heart thudding in my ears. I checked the hallway, locked the deadbolt, pulled the blinds. Every sound from the apartment above, every footstep creak. Faucet drip felt louder, closer. I sat with my back against the door for half the night, the paper still on the coffee table, like it might start moving if I looked away. I didn't reply. I didn't place another order. I stopped logging into that forum altogether. 3 days passed. Then something else happened. I came back from the grocery store one afternoon to find my landlord, Mr. Weaver, standing in the hallway near the utility closet. He was an older guy, always in a Cleveland Browns hat, always sucking on mints. He waved me over and asked, "You seen anyone messing with the breaker room?" I said no and asked why. He told me the lock had been scratched up that morning, like someone had tried to pry it open. Thought it might have been kids or someone trying to steal power. But something in his voice said he didn't quite believe that. That closet controlled power for the entire building, including my unit. It was tucked away near a side exit barely anyone used. You'd have to know the layout to even think to go back there. I thought about the note again. Now we know where you live. That night I checked the lock on my door twice. Then I dragged a chair over and wedged it under the knob. I know it wouldn't have stopped anyone, but it made me feel less exposed. I kept the hallway light on and lay in bed with the TV playing a cooking show on mute, the kind of soft noise that makes you feel less alone. Around 3:40 a.m., a sharp pop jolted me upright. The apartment had gone completely dark. No TV, no power, no streetlight glow through the blinds. I checked my phone, no signal. I got up barefoot and moved slowly to the window. The building across from me was dark, too. Every unit blacked out. I stood there in the silence waiting, telling myself it was a transformer, a coincidence. But I didn't believe that. Not really. I lit a candle and walked the perimeter of my apartment. Every step creaked louder than usual. The refrigerator ticked as it cooled. My breath felt loud. I couldn't hear my neighbors. No voices, no doors opening, no coughs. It was like the whole building was holding its breath. I looked out the peephole. The hallway light was out too. But something moved. Just for a second, a shape, a flicker, like someone gliding just outside the range of what the eye could follow. I stepped back, relocked the deadbolt, and stood there for the rest of the night, holding the heaviest thing I could find, a baseball bat I kept under the bed from when the neighborhood had a string of break-ins. By sunrise, the power came back. No fanfare, no trucks, no blinking clocks. Everything just returned like it had never gone. I called the electric company. They had no record of an outage. Mr. Weaver shrugged and said it happens sometimes, but I could tell he didn't believe it either. That same week, I broke my lease, paid the penalty, packed everything in one night and moved across the state line before the weekend. I never logged back into that forum, never touched a pill from Rex again. I bought a new laptop in cash, changed my number, got a P.O. box. It sounds paranoid, I know, but I couldn't risk it. I still think about that note sometimes. You owe us for trust. I still wonder what would have happened if I'd responded, or if I hadn't woken up that night, or if the power hadn't come back on. People say you can't be too careful online, but they usually mean credit card scams or phishing links. They don't mean your lights going out at 3:40 a.m. I was on the road a lot back then, moving between small towns and forgotten stretches of highway to evaluate claims that never made sense until you stood right in front of them. In late autumn of 2011, I ended up in Ashford, Kentucky, a place I hadn't even heard of before the GPS guided me there. The sun had dropped behind the tree line before I made it into town, and the only open lodging was a squat, brick-sided inn sitting just off the road like it had been waiting for me. The parking lot was half empty, cracked in long, jagged lines, and the sign above the office glowed faintly with the word vacancy, missing its final letter. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood polish and something older like rain-soaked paper. The woman at the desk introduced herself as Evelyn, though she spoke with the kind of formality that made it feel less like a greeting and more like she was acknowledging my presence out of obligation. She handed me an actual brass key attached to a heavy oval tag, the kind you rarely see anymore. My room was at the far end of the corridor. The hallway lighting was dim with bulbs that hummed faintly, and the carpet underfoot had long since given up trying to disguise the uneven boards beneath. I unpacked enough to make the place feel temporary, then sat down at the small desk to review a claim file. That's when I first noticed the sound, a slow, deliberate knock that seemed to come from the room beside mine. 3 knocks evenly spaced, followed by silence. I didn't think much of it at first. Older buildings carry noises differently, and sometimes a pipe or a heater makes its own rhythm. But when I turned out the light later that night, the same pattern started again, only this time closer. Not from the wall, but from the door to my own room. 3 steady knocks, no attempt to open it, just the sound itself pressed into the silence. I got up and opened the door, expecting maybe a late-arriving guest looking for directions. The hallway was empty, the carpet stretching down to a darkened fire exit. I lingered there, listening for footsteps, but the building felt utterly still. When I closed the door and set the latch, I noticed something I hadn't before. The brass key tag Evelyn had given me bore the number 12, but the frame above the door showed a faded, stenciled 11, as if the numbers had been changed at some point. The next morning, I stopped by the office on my way out to grab a coffee. Evelyn looked surprised to see me and asked almost cautiously how I had slept. I mentioned the knocking, half expecting her to tell me it was a plumbing issue. Instead, she just looked down at the counter and said, "That room should have been empty." When I asked what she meant, she quickly changed the subject and asked about my work. I left for the day to inspect a burned-out home a few towns over. By the time I returned, evening had settled into the hills, and a light fog clung to the road. As I pulled into the lot, I saw a man in a gray coat standing at the far edge, his back to the trees. He wasn't smoking, wasn't moving, just standing, as if he had been placed there. When I got out of my car, he turned slightly, but never enough to show his face. I expected to see him later inside, maybe heading to a room, but when I walked the corridor to mine, it was silent, except for the soft hum of those tired bulbs. That night, the knocking came again. This time it was joined by something else, a faint dragging sound along the hallway carpet moving slowly past my door. I sat upright in bed, holding my breath, waiting for it to pass. The noise stopped directly in front of my room, and after a long silence, 3 sharp knocks followed. I forced myself to stay still, not answering, not even breathing too loudly, until eventually the sound retreated back toward the fire exit. I didn't sleep much. At dawn, I decided to check the other rooms on my way out. Room 11's door was locked, but through the narrow gap where the curtain didn't quite meet, I saw a desk lamp glowing faintly. The problem was Evelyn had told me no one was staying there. When I mentioned it to her again as I checked out, she pressed the keys tighter in her hand and simply said, "Some doors are better left closed." I drove out of Ashford that morning with the fog still hanging low across the fields. When I glanced back at the inn from the road, I noticed something I hadn't before. There was no window beside mine, only a blank stretch of brick wall where room 11 should have been. Thinking back on it now, I don't know what unsettled me more, the sound of those knocks or the silence that followed them. Every story I've shared tonight has carried some reminder that ordinary places, the ones we pass without a second thought, sometimes hold on to moments or figures we aren't meant to meet again. A gas station, a cabin, a snowy road, a motel. They're all built for people moving through, not staying forever. Yet something lingers in them like dust in the corners or light trapped behind old curtains. I've come to believe that these stories stay with us because they reveal the thin line between the familiar and the unknown. We expect comfort in routine, but routine is also what makes the strange so deeply unnerving. It's the knock on a door when no one is supposed to be there, the figure on the roadside who doesn't belong, the way time seems to pause at certain hours of the night. What ties them together is not the place or the people, but the silence that follows. The questions left unanswered. The sense that if we look too closely, we might see something we aren't ready to understand. And maybe that's the real reason these stories return to us late at night, when the house is quiet and the hour is uncertain. Thank you for listening all the way through tonight's stories. I hope they've given you something to think about as you settle into your own quiet spaces. If you'd like to hear more, you can subscribe and share these stories with someone who enjoys a late-night listen. And tell me, have you ever stayed somewhere that felt wrong for reasons you couldn't explain? I'd like to hear about it. Sleep well and good night. And